Hi everyone, in this video we are reading What Made You Realize You and the Person You Are Engaged to Weren't Meant to Be. Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. When it was clear that he had proposed, because he had fallen out of love with me, panicked and thought progressing the relationship would fix his secret doubts. Ultimately he had decided to just settle for me, but not let me in on it. Of course, me realizing this was really in him breaking up with me 4 days before the wedding. When family had flown in from 5 continents, I had sold everything to fund our planned move to Australia and covered all his debt. It was public as frickin' just pure or full. Ultimately he did me a favor. I just wish he'd communicated it earlier, instead of, proposing. Realizing someone only asked you to marry them, because they don't want to be alone and don't think they'll find anyone else really sucks. I had such bad mental health and put him through hell with all my attempts and crazy behavior. If I was him I'd have hated me. But he didn't. He loved me unconditionally. I realized I would ruin his life unless I left him and worked on myself. He's happy now from what I've heard and so am I. It was a tough break, but definitely the right thing to do. We got engaged so I moved across the country, Seattle to Newark, to be with him and was there for 6 months building a life together. One night he didn't come home so I did some digging and found out he had a whole secret family only a few miles away. My world came crashing down. Needless to say, it was then I realized we weren't meant to be. He constantly chose and prioritized his relationship with his controlling mother over ours. Nope. He would come home with hickeys on his neck and say that they were bruises from something hitting him in the neck at work. This was happening while my grandmother was on her deathbed, so emotionally I couldn't deal with his cheating. I dumped his sorry ass 3 days after the funeral. When we were at a bar after a really fun day with all his friends, and I went to the ladies' room, came out to be about 10 feet from him making out with one of the women in his social group. When I came home from work after receiving news that I could potentially lose my job, understandably stressed, and when I tried to speak to him about it he flat out told me he didn't care. Joke's on him though, I kept my job and he was made redundant after we split. Karma is a sweet thing, smiley face. There were also a bunch of small things that eventually added up for me. So I was living in the good old Bible Belt, where, in the countryside, it's normal to marry very young, usually someone you knew from high school. Church and family were put before all other things, education and the rest of life. And myself, being agnostic, was not fitting in at all. We were high school sweethearts, gross honestly, and we went to separate colleges. But they were only an hour apart, so we still saw each other every weekend. During the 4 years, as I was growing into an adult and who I wanted to become, I realized that he wasn't changing, like not maturing at all. He was super smart, engineering degree and everything. Then he became very possessive, not in an aggressive way, but more like he was insecure, always needed to know my location and who I was with. Then he started to tell me who I couldn't hang out with and what I couldn't wear when I went to parties, which would have been okay if he asked. But he told me these things, like it wasn't an option. So basically all the friends I was allowed to have were already his friends. At the time, I was getting my degrees to work in forensics, and I told him that NC was not the place I would be able to get a job. So I told him I wanted to move to a bigger city, more crimes and such. Not like a cross country, just a state with a bigger city, that is Atlanta, Baltimore, D.C., Miami, etc. He told me that we wouldn't be moving to a different state. Skip to the end of my first year of grad school. I'm in NY at this point and we're doing long distance. The topic comes up again, and he asks which month the next summer I would be moving home. I told him I was going wherever I got a job offer. Seems reasonable. He bought me a plane ticket and told me to come home so he could talk some sense into me basically. It was on my way back to the south that I decided it would be my last trip. At the end of the trip, he was dropping me off at the airport. I put the engagement ring on his dashboard, got my bags, caught my flight, and haven't spoken to him since. Best move I've made in my life so far. Planning the wedding, open bar was more important than inviting my family. Wow, was more important than date night. He threw money at problems to try to make them go away. Eventually, I just didn't want to be in that house anymore. My grandma passed away and left me one medium-sized piece of furniture. My live-in boyfriend said we didn't have room for it. Meanwhile he had an entire second bedroom and full-size basement full of comic books and toys. when I was driving home from the airport after a months-long stint of working out of state. And all I could think was I don't want to go home. Lots of stuff led to that point, but that was the moment of clarity that started the process of breaking up. It was a series of smaller things through the 2 years we lived together, but the apex was when I realized that I felt more only when he was at home than I felt when he wasn't home. I legit thought we were meant to be. We're high school sweethearts and had been together for 10 years when it all ended, with a wedding scheduled for 6 months from the breaking up date. It was tough. Some other things. He would always ask for his mother's opinion about everything, and as much as I loved his mother, I was expecting to be in a relationship with an adult. He would frown and act as a poor little thing when he had to do the dishes, as if he was extremely tired after doing so, and that was an excruciating activity. He would never clean other things. Doing the dishes was the far as he would go regarding house chores. He would never do anything if I didn't ask him to. It was as if he was incapable of even noticing something had to be done. Eventually he was playing games the whole night, and I would always go to bed alone. I eventually found out that money was a priority to him, as in my goal is to be rich and prioritizing money, which isn't something I agree with. And well, the relationship just died. I was alone, eventually found myself deeply in love with a friend and well, this is a story for some other time, but I'm married now, living in another country and extremely happy. I never felt more loved in my life and I never feel like I'm alone in the world. So I guess it all turned out for the best, smiley face. I think my ex and I were, indeed, meant to be. We were meant to be together for some years, grow together and learn what we had to in order to live our lives separately. Every fight turned into a huge dramatic production. I realized there was a correct way of fighting and I wanted to figure it out. He wanted to star in his own drama, be the wailing martyr with hand to forehead rather than talking it out like adults. He pushed me into setting a wedding date before I was 100% ready. We were both about to start our last year of college when we got engaged, but we were together for 5 years at this point. And then 2 months before the wedding he dumped me for another girl he started talking to. That made him have doubts. 4 months he begged for me back and said he ended things with her, only for me to find out he got her pregnant. They are now married with 2 children. Side note, my brother is still friends with him, perfectly okay with me, and says my ex hates his life and he and his wife still have fights over me 6 years later. HA realized that he only proposed because it was what you were supposed to do and wasn't sure he actually loved me. Probably for the best since we've grown to be very, very different people and I'm sure we would have been divorced by now. I realized he had totally stopped trying. I had endless, tear-filled conversations with him about our issues and he never seemed to do anything to help them. He never wanted to go anywhere, or do anything fun. He didn't see the importance in doing anything for me. And when someone stops trying, it's really easy to fall out of love. I always wished that he had done something tangible to make me leave him. Like cheat or lie. When you just quietly fall out of love with someone, it feels way harder to leave than it does when there's a big blowout or wrongdoing. That was years ago and I still feel guilt to this day about it, but I don't regret it at all. He said that when we decided to have a baby, he wouldn't be in the delivery room with me, because men are supposed to wait outside and smoke cigars. I shit you not. His dad treated his mum like crap and he was okay with it. He constantly blew his nose and would just throw the Kleenexes on the floor, would never ever clean up after himself. Frick, am I ever glad I grew out of the stage where I was so insecure I felt like I deserved it. When I realized he was getting physically aggressive with me and was super controlling, everything had to be his way. Lots of gaslighting. Wasn't able to make my own choices. Best decision I ever made. When his mom invited a lot of people, 30-40 people, to the wedding. People she hadn't seen in 10-15 years, but she reached for them to invite them, while my parents were going to have only 5 guests. It was going to be a small wedding and my parents were paying for it. I told her she was going to have guests, but no that many. He got mad at me and told me his mum could have anything she wanted. I thought about holding it together, but fortunately one day he texted me to tell me it was all over. Thank God I don't have him in my life anymore. When I didn't want to plan the wedding at all, even when the family asked about it, when he checked all the boxes, but I told my mum there was still something missing. When he acted like he always knew more than me and I felt he didn't respect me as an adult and working professional. When him coming home from his work didn't add value to my day. When I knew there was more to love than a roommateship. Even after years together, I never felt I made the wrong choice walking away. When he told me he wanted time to think about what he really wanted, I told him to take all the time in the world as I handed back the ring. I overthink about this and I'm currently engaged. A week after we were engaged, I sobbed because I was so scared if I'm making the wrong decision. But so many other times I look at him and think he's a perfect partner. We are a team with everything: house, dog, friends, picking the person up when someone is down, life in general. He makes me laugh more than anyone else. I am proud of him, support him, care for him, and he does the same as me. And then sometimes when we have off days, or something isn't jiving, I feel like my head goes, am I making the wrong decision? Am I just choosing this out of comfort? Are we going to divorce? Does he think we're going to divorce? If I'm thinking about this, does this mean we're not meant to be together? It's a scary feeling when you can't trust your own head, and it has this chatter in the back of your mind, and it's hard, because you really don't know what is the right or wrong answer, because he is the best relationship I've ever been in, but I don't know if there is more, and I don't want to give up on us to find out. Any advice, my fellow women? This probably doesn't count, because I didn't realize it in the moment and still went on to marry him anyway, but it was while planning our wedding. I was visibly stressing, feeling extremely overwhelmed, and near tears when he cracked a joke like he always did and went on playing his video game. I lost it and started crying. I asked, is this what our life is going to be like? I get to be the stressed out, nagging wife while you're the happy-go-lucky funny guy? The answer was yes. That was exactly how our life was going to be. We were married for nearly 4 years before I called it quits. On one of my nights off, the 9th of July, I decided I wanted to make tacos late at night for my lunch. She was sleepy, but wanted to come with her to the store to grab a few toppings. I absolutely did not want her to come with, so I helped her get ready for bed, tucked her in, and cuddled for a while, and took off. By that point, it was 1230 am and was the 10th of July. Then on the way to the store, I caught myself thinking about how I could help her to shower more than once a month. Had the sudden realization that I was more of a parent than a partner. I spent, like, 3 hours at Walmart just staring at random items, as it set in on me that my fiancé, the person I thought was the love of my life, felt more like a burden I wish I didn't have to deal with. For what it's worth, the 10th of July is her birthday. God, I felt like such shit, because I knew there wasn't any point in trying to fix it, since the shower thing had been an issue the entire 4 years we were together, and having the realization that I was going to break up with her on her birthday of all days sucked. I would not get excited or happy when he messaged me, or when we hung out. I was never really all that excited, but it became a chore to hug him, kiss him, hold his hand. I was excited to be engaged. I was excited for a wedding. I was excited for a honeymoon, but I didn't give two shits that it was with him. We came from pretty strict Christian families, and in deep Southern culture. I tried to call off the wedding, but it would have been an embarrassment to everyone. I was young and dumb. I even attempted to leave him 6 months after we got married. I was simply his mother at that point, but told by all family I had no choice but to stay. Finally grew a backbone 8 years later. If you aren't excited to be around or with someone, or don't want things down the road with them, then save everyone the heartache and drama. It really shouldn't be a questions. You should just know if you want to be with them or not. I guess maturity. We cancelled our first wedding date, because we felt we had to mature more as a couple. Hope that makes sense. I loved him with all my heart and could imagine growing old with him, but I didn't want to have sex with him anymore. It was the right decision to leave, as he told me years later that he realized he was never in love with me, and I'm happily married to someone else now. When he spent more time playing his games and working, instead of spending time with me, or when he would talk with his father for a couple hours, they would drive around and smoke, and then when he came home there were plans on how his next paycheck was going to pay off more of his dad's and sister's bills, meaning I would have to cover his half of rent, or other bills and groceries. I stopped planning the wedding and suggested we waited another year until our life was more on track. After I told him that, he freaked out and asked why we didn't just go down to the courthouse and get it done now, then celebrate later with our families. I said no and he pouted for days about it. We also stopped having regular sex, because he was self-conscious about his body, and he would never help with chores, cooking, or the dog. Turns out he was afraid I would leave him if we didn't get hitched before I realized how truly lazy he is. He was a good man, but lazy partner. I was hospitalized for a suicide attempt, undiagnosed mental health issues, and my friend had to strong-arm him into the hospital. I found out later he called my mum. Instead of an ambulance, she called 911 after he tried to convince her to let me sleep it off. I was unconscious, cold, and white as sheetrock apparently. Granted, I'm sure I wasn't easy to deal with at the time and not everyone is equipped to handle that, so I'm not angry about it, but it was definitely a sign we weren't a good match. Well, let's start by saying that I was loosely engaged. He passed me a note in a garden to read. No ring, no down on one knee, no sparks. I said yes, but that was exactly how far it went, so there you go. It was a tactic to keep me around, because he could feel that I was at my limit with his bullshit. Please subscribe if you like the video. It really helps the channel to grow. Adios.